Good afternoon. This is really a great pleasure for me to be here, to have the opportunity to address you, to bring the experiences that I've been involved with for many years, treating drug users in the United States, here to share with this group. One of the things I love most in the world is meeting my colleagues from around the world. I also want to first thank Tim Bingham and the Irish Needle Exchange Forum for inviting me. It's really a great honor to be here. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I have spent over 30 years working with drug and alcohol users. I began as a graduate student, so my first patients with drug and alcohol issues with virtually no training, specialty training in the area, which was the norm back then and still to this day is pretty much the norm. There tends not to be much good training. So my first years out of graduate school, I worked in drug treatment programs and learned what was then and still today, I think, the dominant abstinence-only treatment model. And I think we did a lot of good work. I ran some programs as a clinical director. Over the course of that first period in my career, I came to see the limitations of an abstinence-only treatment model, and ultimately came to recognize that the harm reduction model, which most people, many people know as primarily a public health approach, is actually a set of principles that can inform treatment across the spectrum and really enhance the quality of what we do, providing principles for engaging people, individualizing the treatment, developing collaborative relationships in which we can negotiate with patients all of the clinical decision making. We've been hearing today about problems engaging patients, keeping patients in treatment, understanding the complexity of what's going on around the substance use. And I would suggest to you to consider the harm reduction model as a model that really enables us to create therapeutic relationships that are best suited to addressing the individual. And that's really what I'd like to focus on today. A new model for understanding the complexity of substance use problems, and a model that I think suggests why a harm reduction psychotherapy that is integrative, that can really bring together biological, psychological, social interventions in a way that's uniquely tailored to each patient, is going to be most effective across the spectrum. And I'd like you to consider how this approach can enhance the delivery of the interventions that we're all offering, whether it's syringe exchange, substitution treatment, outpatient treatment, or even inpatient detox. Just consider that as a proposition. I'd like us to begin, however, by considering the truth of the matter. I believe that drug treatment that we're in an international crisis. We're not doing a very good job around the world helping millions and millions of drug users anywhere on the planet. The US government estimates that we have roughly 80 million Americans who are struggling with abuse, dependence, or binge patterns of using. And we treat only a tiny fraction of those, and typically ineffectively. So consider how that may apply to your context here in Ireland. What I'm suggesting is that our collective interest as a field is in figuring out how we can offer treatments to people that are more attractive, that actually attract people to treatment, that are better at retaining people in treatment, and better at partnering with people to move them or support them in their process toward healing, growth, and positive change around substance use and other issues. That's our challenge in the field. We spend billions of dollars on the international war on drugs, research, and the treatment industry. We care about our loved ones who are struggling with drug and alcohol problems. They're missing work, they're suffering, they're dying of overdose in far too great numbers. They're taxing our medical system. So what is it that we're doing wrong, or how can we actually improve what we're doing? So I'd like to suggest that we consider our model for understanding addiction. Our models or paradigms for understanding things determine how we act on them. We're in the midst of a scientific revolution, I believe, in this field of substance misuse and addiction. We're moving from an old, overly simplistic disease model to what I think of as a psychobiosocial model. I was recently introduced to the concept of psychobio rather than biopsycho. Somebody pointed out, we know that there are biological and psychological currents that contribute to behavior, but we really have a difficult time parsing out which is which or how much is which. So it's best really for us when trying to understand complex behavior to consider that there's a piece of each. And we need to kind of explore and try to assess that in the midst of our ongoing treatments. Now, from this perspective, biology and behavior interact with meaning and social context in complex ways that are unique for each person and give rise to the phenomena. My more than 30 years of clinical experience working in this field have convinced me that this more complex way of understanding substance misuse and addiction suggests this integrative harm reduction psychotherapy, and that this will be able to dramatically increase our effectiveness at helping people. And I'm going to try to make this case to you in the next half hour. These ideas I've presented in my book, Harm Reduction Psychotherapy, a New Treatment for Drug and Alcohol Problems, and a number of journal articles and book chapters. There are some on my website that you can download for free that really describe the model in more detail. For many, if not most problem users, alongside the brain changes associated with acute and chronic use and the powerful conditioning of habits that accompanies them, the multiple personal and social meanings that substances carry and express are powerful motives for understanding continued use in the face of negative consequences. This is our definition of addiction. An appreciation of the reasons that people use, the personal, the subjective, the often hidden dimension of drug use is critical to every aspect of treatment. Engagement, therapeutic alliance, assessment, diagnosis, treatment planning, and successful outcomes across the entire spectrum. I think that a failure to adequately appreciate the key contribution of meaning is a major contributor to treatment success. And this is particularly important to consider in light of recent advances in our understanding of the brain basis of addiction, which I think is a very welcome development, has very positive implications for treatment and social policy. But I think there are some potential pitfalls that we need to consider. So I'm suggesting that addiction, substance misuse, is not just a brain disease, although sometimes the reports that we hear suggest that it is just a brain disease. For example, in August it was reported in the LA Times that the American Society of Addiction Medicine declared addiction is a brain disease. It said addiction is not simply a behavioral problem involving too much drugs and alcohol. Instead, addiction is a primary chronic disease of brain reward, motivation, memory, and related circuitry. This follows an earlier statement by the NIDA director in 2004, Nora Volkow, who said, drug addiction is a brain disease. Although initial drug use might be voluntary, once addiction develops, the control is markedly disrupted. Imaging studies have shown specific abnormalities in the brain. And then before that, in 2001, NIDA director Alan Leshner said, "A core concept has been evolving with scientific advances over the past decade about drug addiction. It's a brain disease that develops over time as a result of initially voluntary behavior. The consequence is virtually uncontrollable compulsive drug use, seeking and use that interferes with, if not destroys, the individual's functioning in the family." And here's a key phrase that we hear over and over. It's as if drugs have hijacked the brain's natural motivational control circuits, resulting in the drug becoming the sole, or at least the top, motivational priority for the individual. You see, so these statements really suggest that the brain is the primary vehicle that drives this addictive process. And they're very compelling for us to consider. You know, once and for all, we should stop blaming addicted people for their illness. They should not be treated. I mean, they should be treated, not shamed, not kicked out of treatment for using, not incarcerated. The statements sound like the science is in. The problem is brain changes. You know, these statements can be interpreted to suggest that it's the brain changes as the sole explanation and not the psychology and the social context. And that's the piece that I want us to consider the interaction with. I think it would be a mistaken interpretation to assume that, even according to Alan Leshner, later on in that paper that I talked about, he speaks of more or less the same thing that I'm suggesting when he says, "Many people erroneously believe that biological and behavioral explanations are alternative or competing ways to understand, when in fact they're complementary and integratable. Modern science has taught us that it's much too simplistic to set biology in opposition to behavior, or to pit willpower against brain chemistry. Addiction involves inseparable biological and behavioral components. It's a quintessentially biobehavioral disorder." Now, I'd like to build on Dr. Leshner's statement and suggest that problematic substance use is not just driven by brain and conditioning, which certainly are very powerful contributors, but also by personal meanings and functions that the behavior takes on. Brain, behavior, and multiple meanings. And that's the piece that I want to kind of give you a feeling for based on my clinical work. You know, people use drugs for reasons, and reasons that may feel vital to the user's survival. Some of them are clear to the user, and some may be out of the person's awareness. These reasons become intertwined with biology and conditioning and social context in ways that are unique for each individual. Ignoring the meaning dimension is likely to set up failure, as these powerful motives are kept out of treatment. And I'll give you a sense of this from experiences that are reported to me by patients over many, many years. The acute effects of drugs that drugs have on the brain are rewarding and become meaningful in relation to the whole person in his or her social context. Brain changes become wrapped in meaning. They take on multiple meanings that add to or determine their reinforcing effects. People may use drugs because they feel good or they work and are reinforcing in some way. But the pleasure may be particularly important in relation to, for example, a life in which there are few other sources of pleasure, such as a life of poverty, homelessness, increasingly common work lives, like many of us have, in which hours are demanded that leave little time for self-care and recreation. The temporary escape afforded by getting high may be compelling in relation to a perfectionistic, self-critical personality style. I bet you that would characterize most of the people in this room. You know, that does not allow oneself the time to relax because one's work is never done. One's achievements are never enough. I mean, this can bring about a sense of being filled with anxiety about the threat of failure or depression over feeling that one has already failed. I see this picture every day in my patients' lives. The release afforded by the drug effect is frequently a release from a generalized sense of inhibition and inability to express one's feelings and needs. or vulnerability spontaneously in life, such that one feels dead, cut off, disconnected, and tense. In this personal context, the high may enable one to have the temporary experience of feeling alive, feeling able to connect with others, to express anger, sexuality, grief, and enthusiasm. Drug use may also express feelings and needs in the act of using that people are unable to express in words. While I don't feel safe enough to tell you I resent you, when I drink too much, I can continue to drink and defy your efforts to control me. And at the same time, I can express my anger by sort of killing you off in my mind when I'm drinking. Or excessive drug use may be my cry for help. The way I express my need to be cared for, my way of saying, I'm in agonizing emotional pain and I never learned how to express it and ask for help. Please don't reject me, help me. So what could look like a person who is just disregarding the feelings of others may be a person who's in terrible pain and is attempting to communicate in the only way the person can. Now it can get more complicated. Well, I wanted to take a moment just to talk you through what is a pretty crude attempt on my part to describe what I see as the psychobiosocial process of substance misuse and addiction. So it's really a vulnerability model where we can consider that all of the data that we have about various variables that seem to be associated with substance misuse and addiction really represent vulnerability. So certainly trauma, there are constitutional factors, co-occurring issues, social problems like poverty or being the member of a stigmatized group. It's that those factors come into play in relation to the experience of substance use such that there's a unique fit. That substance use experience becomes meaningful in relation to these vulnerabilities, which is what is reinforcing. It's not simply the effect of the drug in isolation. Once people begin to use in a chronic fashion, there are all sorts of psychobiosocial factors that kick in that exacerbate or contribute to the original vulnerabilities. And particularly in a context like we have in this planet, where drug use is criminalized and stigmatized. So however the drug is functioning in a helpful way to an individual, it also becomes tinged with guilt, shame, anxiety, self-hate possibly. And so all of that then can exacerbate the original vulnerabilities and contribute to intensified desire and use. So now we've got a process model of understanding that vicious cycle. I think what we gain from thinking of it in this complex way is that wherever a person is willing to begin working on themselves, at any point in the process can be a point of engagement, a point of contact, whether it's working on the homelessness, working on the depression, working on the trauma. And that's really where the beauty of a harm reduction model comes in. Meeting a person where they are around what they are motivated to begin working on becomes the point of contact around which we can begin therapeutic alliance and begin the work that then can build toward increasingly addressing more and more of the problematic issues in people's lives. I like to think that we don't need to know the end point, whether it's moderation, abstinence, substitution treatment, or what have you, in order to begin the journey with people. So let's talk a little bit about trauma and dissociation, which makes it even more complex. Sometimes the reasons for using are very much in people's awareness. If you ask people with empathy, curiosity, and respect why they use, they'll tell you. However, people who have experienced trauma in early life, such as significant physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, loss or abandonment, deficient parenting, or mental illness in the family, substance use may become meaningful in ways that are dissociated outside of the user's awareness. If you ask these folks why they use, they may just tell you, I felt like getting high. And if you accept this statement at face value, it could be evidence of the brain disease, right? But if we consider that there may be something more meaningful going on in that experience, things can open up. Trauma is typically coped with by dissociating, cutting off feelings, getting rid of parts of oneself that threaten to bring about more trauma, such as the angry kid who got whacked basically learned you don't express anger, you get rid of that part of yourself. Anger, sadness, grief, shame, humiliation, aliveness, curiosity may all become threatening in certain contexts and need to be suppressed or denied. These vital aspects of the self may live in vague discomfort, just out of awareness, leaving the trauma survivor feeling tense, dead, tuned out, like a ghost, or like Frankenstein, which is the way one of my women patients described herself. She felt like the walking dead. She's actually, there's a case discussion in a paper that I have on my website, which you might be very interested in reading about her. She went from serious suicidality with a history of multiple trauma and life-threatening substance use to very stable, moderate use of alcohol, and finally connecting in relationships with people and having a full life. It's just a miraculous kind of story. These vital parts of the self may find expression in substance use. The substance use can provide the user a temporary experience of being able to reconnect with these parts and to feel alive. The addict self may both contain the parts of me that were unwanted, beaten, and humiliated, and the parts of me that want to live and survive in a family that does not want them. I want so badly to be loved that I'll be good, submissive, and pleasing. However, my own needs for recognition and self-assertiveness build up in this intensely frustrating way, and then I use drugs to give myself a small window of escape to just be myself. How many times have you heard people talking about, you know, getting a pile of cocaine and holing up in a hotel room somewhere, or, you know, shutting the door and just downing a bottle of scotch or Irish whiskey? I see this dynamic repeated over and over. So early trauma also typically results in problems managing intense emotional states, self-hate, self-esteem problems, mistrust of others, a loss of faith in the world. All of these problems render people likely to find the state of intoxication relieving or pleasurable in some way. And I've seen trauma in my patients so often that I'm beginning to think that excessive substance use is a meaningful reaction to trauma in an attempt to cope with pain that people may not have other ways of managing. When drugs carry and express important personal and social meanings for the user, the thought of giving up the drug or cutting back may be experienced as a threat to one's psychic survival or capacity to function in the world. When drug use has taken on these multiple meanings, it may take some time with proper exploration in a safe therapeutic relationship for the person to be able to begin to identify the various meanings and functions so that alternative, less harmful routes of expression can be found. This is why we need harm reduction contexts where people can come in to receive treatment while they are currently using and not be forced off of the substance, whether it's the illicit substance or the prescribed substance, before they've actually resolved things to the point where they're ready to take that next step. I have 5 minutes?
If you could wrap it up, Stephen, you could.
Okay. I have a wonderful case study here, which I can't share with you. But if you come up and talk to me, maybe I'll give you a copy of this and you can read it. So I'm just going to not tell you Mary's story. A word about empirical support. There are some studies have found, for example, that as many as 86% of women with significant substance use problems have histories of early trauma. And where men have experienced early sexual abuse, there are higher rates of addiction. The difficult childhood experiences study has also found that the more difficult experiences are present in people's early lives, the greater the incidence of injection drug use, smoking, and alcoholism. So we see lots of data that supports what I'm sharing with you here. In terms of treatment, in my view, along with the medical and behavioral interventions, people with drug problems also need therapeutic contexts that will help them clarify the meaning and positive functions that drugs have for them while they continue to use. This is my definition of harm reduction psychotherapy. The harm reduction principle of meeting people where they are can translate therapeutically into creating therapeutic alliance. If we don't have an alliance with a patient, we don't have a patient, as far as I'm concerned. And it's very hard to promote positive change. Expecting someone to give up a drug that fulfills a vital role in their life before they've identified the meaning and discovered a new solution will be met with understandable resistance. The harm reduction principles of meeting people where they are as unique people with their own goals and readiness to change, and embracing all reductions in drug-related harm are the ideal conditions under which to establish this therapeutic alliance. And the alliance is only possible when people feel fully understood with empathy and respect. Integrative harm reduction psychotherapy offers the user a therapeutic space or relationship wherever the user is regarding goals. This makes the alliance possible, and it in turn enables this collaborative, mutual collaborative exploration of the variables that contribute to the substance use. As these various currents, the biological, psychological, and social currents, are identified, we can then bring together a highly personalized blend of biological, psychological, and social interventions to maximize the effectiveness of the treatment. By not allowing or inviting, if necessary, the abused, unwanted, agonizing aspects of the patient into the treatment, the message is just like the traumatizing parent. We don't want to hear it. Keep it to yourself. And in that context, the drug use remains the best possible solution. Creating this safe relational space for people to bring these unwanted parts of themselves enables the possibility of healing, growth, and positive change regarding substance use and the whole person. Thank you.